This is segment 3 on operations strategy. So now we're going we ended segment 2 by looking at the steps of the formal process for developing a operations strategy, or an operations strategic plan, if you wish. So I'm just going to go for some of the elements of that plan so that we just have a clearer sense on how the various parts need to come together. Well, we said that we're going to look at market segments and we want to identify what each market wants. In essence, we want to define the value proposition for each market. And what's a value proposition? If you look here, it's a concept that's used widely in marketing. Is what you're delivering that's considered a value to a customer. So value is really the sum of these three things here: product and service attributes, image, relationships. And when it comes to product and service attributes, there are multiple dimensions: the functionality of the product, its quality, its price, the time that it takes to either receive it. You could also include things like service, after sales service, and so forth. The image, what is the image that you value with this particular product or service? Having Nike versus just a no-name brand pair of sneakers is all about value and image. And then relationships with your suppliers, relationship with your customers, and so on. Those things are also quite crucial. Certain people like a certain level of customer intimacy, and so they expect to have a fairly good relationship with the company or the service provider that they're dealing with. Now, external performance objectives, we mentioned this concept where we look at the external performance objectives as basically your marketing objectives, what your market requirements are. And we separate those two into order winners and order qualifiers. This was suggested by a guy named Terry Hill from the UK. This concept of order winning criteria, factors that directly contribute to gaining more business, which are regarded by customers as key to competitiveness, and then order qualifying criteria, which are factors that the firm must have in place before a customer would even consider doing business with the firm. All right. In services, the same concept: service qualifier, service winner. And so we have one more concept that we added to this as an actual service loser, which is that there's a particular failure that actually causes a customer to disappear and never show up again. All right. And so failure to deliver at or above the expected level for competitive dimension. So you got to be very careful because you lose people in that regard. How can we identify order winners, order qualifiers? Well, order winners provide critical advantage with customers. The main factor that's driving competitiveness, provides as well an important advantage with most customers, or provide a useful advantage with most customers, right? Factor usually considered by customers in making a purchasing decision. So these are ways to think about the criteria. So if you actually identify the attributes of a product or service and you ask these questions, then you might be able to identify your order winners. And then if you simply are able to say, well, we need to be at least up to good industry standard, or we need to be around the median of the industry standard, or we need to be within a close range of the industry, well, those are just qualifying criteria. Less important, not usually considered, but could become important in the future. Very rarely considered by the customer, never considered, or not likely to be considered. And so when you're judging performance, you could actually try to come up with a scale to rate how well you're doing. And this is taken from an article where you could judge order winning criteria. Your decision criteria, your criteria here. And we have a scale of 1 to 9. So like kind of 1, 2, and 3. If you are order winners, you got to be performing in the 1, 2, or maybe even possibly 3 level. Order qualifiers, you want to be down around 4, 5, 6 kind of area, and then less important criteria, maybe 7, 8, 9. So you could kind of just divide it up into sort of these 3 segments if you wish. And this diagram kind of shows, here's the a framework that allows us to look at what you expected how you expected to perform relative to competitors, and the level of importance attached to the criteria. So if it's a 1, that means it's an order winning criteria. Well, you would be expected to perform somewhere in this zone right here, right? So if you think of this zone, above this line is considered a minimum performance boundary. So if it is a 1, you expect it to be somewhere high, better than 3, but 1, 2, or 3, or something like in that range. Or you need to be pretty close to 1 if you can, if you want to be the top, right? Things like lead time, for example, if that's an order winning criteria, if its importance is a 2, you may want to be somewhere in this region right here, around 3 or higher, right? So this zone, this diagram really just gives you a sense of where you ought to be. So the appropriate zone is right in here, and you can sort of match it. So if something has an importance level of 5, then you want to be somewhere around, as you can see here, 4 or better. If it has an importance level of 8, then you want to probably be in that region right here, 9, and so on. However, if you're down here, you're in the zone that needs improvement. Okay, so for example, if you're 2, the level of importance is a 2, and you're 5, you're saying, whoa, we got to improve this and get this beyond this minimum line right here. But if you're down here, urgent action is needed. This is a 2, and your score is a 9 or an 8 or 7 or 6. It's not very good. So here is considered urgent action, and above here is considered the excess zone. So think about this. If the level of importance is a 9, but you're performing at a level of a 2 or 1, whoa, so you're doing very good on something that's not very important. So you want to get away from that, okay? We're just going to expand on some of these objectives. So quality, make things right, delivery, you want to have speed, make it fast, make things on time, be dependable, have the ability to change if we need to. When it comes to cost, make things cheap, service and after sales support, make it easy to use the product, innovation, make new things timely. And I should mention that one more area that's now considered is sustainability, environmental sustainability as a performance objective. And so make things that do not harm the environment. And I should have added that a little earlier. Competitive priorities. Well, so our competitive priorities are essentially your same performance objectives that allow you to compete. And we see for services, availability, convenience, dependability, personalization, price. So think about any company, a service company that you like. You could find out, well, what is it that they're really offering you? Is it convenience, dependability, personalization, price? So if you think about a car rental service that you like doing business with, Budget or Avis or Thrifty, you might say, well, what I like is the availability of product. They always have, and then they're very accessible. They're conveniently located, the price is reasonable, and then the cars are safe, right? That might be your competitive priorities for that environment. This PowerPoint presentation is available to you. We go through a bit more details on sub-elements of the various performance objectives, but I don't want to go through them slide by slide here, so I'm going to let you read those. But just to give you an example, for example, when we think about being low cost, it's important to not just think of low cost as just a simple aggregate value. It actually has sub-dimensions. And so we could think of the initial cost of the product, that's the cost of purchasing it, the operating cost, the cost of using the product over its life, and the maintenance cost. Well, I'll tell you, if you think about computer printers, for computers, the initial cost is often very low. Maintenance cost typically is not that high at all. You don't have to do a lot of maintenance. It's actually cheaper to throw it away and buy a new one. But the operating cost is ridiculous. We spend an awful lot of money on ink, which is part of the operating cost. And usually by the second time you bought some ink, you've already paid. We've already gone past the cost of the product. And I'm sure that all of you will agree with that. And we see dimensions of quality that we will talk about later on, the cost, dimensions of delivery, accuracy, completeness, dependability, and so on. Dimensions of flexibility, volume flexibility, process flexibility, and so forth. Dimensions of product innovation, being able to create new products, customizing products for customers, making modifications, and so on. Dimensions of service, customer support, sales support, problem solving, information, etc. And as an example for Southwest, it's order winning criteria, cost and reliability. So the qualifying criteria is dependable, it's safe, and it delivers some basic service. Okay? Last but not least is then, so this is really just thinking of how we think of going back to the operations resources. Well, we could think of it in terms of a concept of a value chain. Well, that's where the operations resources are in the value chain. And this just sort of shows us your Porter's generic value chain. Inbound logistics, stuff coming into the organization. Operations, that's where the transformation takes place. And outbound logistics, and then marketing gets involved, and service, after sales service, and so forth. All right? And here are 10 decision areas of OM, which is where we actually go to make decisions, and we manipulate these various levers to give us the capabilities that we need to meet the market requirements. We've already talked about that. And this just goes into, and all of these elements are part of the value chain. So the next few slides just simply expands a bit on each of the areas. So in terms of plant and equipment, what are some of the kinds of decisions to consider? Well, the span of the processes, in other words, how much can you do? The plant size, how big should your plant be? Where should it be located? What kind of equipment and tooling? The layout of your facilities, level of automation, how much specialization you need on the production planning side, your quantities, your batch sizes, your job machine assignments, your inventory levels, inventory control, HR, skill, wage policies, training, supervision, design, number of products, design stability, risk tolerance. So all of these things have decisions that could be considered. And take any organization, you will see those decisions have been made. Where it's been located, that's a decision. When the product is being manufactured through a particular process, is there automation? So there was a decision made about automation. The kind of equipment that was used, if it's low-tech, high-tech, mid-tech, you will see that how the product is actually being distributed once it leaves the production facility and so on. How inventory is controlled, the distribution channels, how that's configured and laid out. All of those are operations decisions, very critical operations decisions. All right? So service design is really no different. It's just a slightly different terminology and emphasis. Well, in terms of you have structural and managerial elements and the delivery system, the front and back office, your facility design, how you lay it out if you think of a hotel, and the look of that hotel, its location, the capacity in terms of number of people serving in a bank as an example, or in a supermarket, all of those. The managerial elements, your sort of service encounter, your culture of the organization, so the culture of one bank versus the next, the culture of one supermarket versus the next, quality, how do you measure that, managing capacity and demand through your queues and appointment system and so on, and the kind of information you gather and how you use it in decision making. So all these elements are part of your service design. And then you have finally the concept of internal performance objectives. We did talk about external performance objectives, where we focus on what customers want. The internal performance objectives, when you do the analysis of your capacity and capabilities to deliver what the market wants, you may find weaknesses. When you find weaknesses, then you are able to identify what your internal performance objectives are. And it might be to improve quality, to improve product design, to improve supply chain management, to improve maintenance. The very same 10 decision areas of OM, we would identify, if we identify weaknesses with them, then we establish objectives that relate to them, and hence we then get the internal performance objectives. All right? And last but not least, what I will mention here is this concept of alignment, because we did say that operation strategy is the reconciliation of your operating resources with your market requirements. Well, so that means that we expect alignment. How can we know if operations happen to be aligned to your market requirements? And this is a tool that I found in an article that I think is useful. And I'm going to try to explain it to you. So let's look at this. So if this is a company that you want to do an operations alignment on analysis, we will first of all decide which of the competitive priorities, right, are important. So maybe the company is just competing on cost and quality. So you'd stipulate that. Or it's competing on delivery and flexibility, or it's competing on innovation. So once you decide what that is, you indicate that here. And how well is the company doing? So you should have some ways of measuring its delivery performance, or its cost performance, or its quality performance. We put that here. Then what is the market doing? How is the market doing? Generally speaking. And then, so you might say, for example, delivery of goods from a warehouse when a customer purchases an item, typically for the industry is about a week. But the strongest competitor, how are they doing? Maybe 3 days. Okay? And so what is your company target? You want to target 2 days. Or maybe you want to target the same as the best in class company, 3 days as well. And then is the market criteria, is it qualifying or is it winning? So you could actually stipulate here, is this a qualifier or is this a winner? Qualifier, qualifier, winner, winner, and so forth. So you could decide that. All right. Now we look at the internal capabilities, and we will look at it here. This part lists actually your processes, what kind of process structure you have. And we will go through that when we discuss process strategy. Is it a job shop, a batch flow, just-in-time type of system, or continuous flow operation? And what this diagram shows you is which of these systems are best suited to the different performance criteria. So when it comes to cost, you don't get the best performance of cost from a job shop. So if a company is saying, we want to compete on costs, but its process strategy is to use a job shop, you got to say, well, this is not the best way to compete on costs. You might need to actually consider some automation. So as we go further, you see here, equipment pace, line flow. That's basically automation. All right. So for costs, these ones tend to be a lot better. And the size of this tells you how strong it is in that area. So that's really allows you to do the sort of a process alignment here based on what your competitive priorities are. The next thing you want to do in this segment is to ask yourself, for each of these elements of our value chain, what's our state of maturity? How well are we doing? And so in terms of human resources, so what happens is that there's a set of criteria here for, you know, that describes what level that you're at. And so human resources, you can be infant, or you could be industry average, you could be an adult, or you could be world class. So you want to also assess yourself. Is our HR world class, or is it just infant? We just have basic personnel records. We hire and lay off workers, etc., and we don't empower them, etc. Right? But then when you say industry average, what are some of the things that we do here? Employees, we see them as an expense, right? I can't read this very well, but essentially, as we go across the spectrum, then we see employees here as an investment. So it just basically takes you, this is how world-class companies view things. And you may just want to assess yourself on each of those and say, hopefully, that the company would be at least an adult in all of those areas. Last but not least, the very same 10, or not 10, well, it could be 10 decision areas of OM, and the competitive priorities, we look at the interface between those, the interaction, and ask ourselves to what extent HR is actually supportive of these things, or structure is supportive, or production planning and control is supportive. So if, for example, you want to compete on low costs, and you describe your HR resources and you say that you have highly skilled workers who are highly compensated, that is out of alignment of a low-cost strategy. So you will need to consider low-cost workers like your McDonald's and your Taco Bells and so on. People that operate from a manual, they're not very highly trained, and then you deal with very high turnovers as a result of that. But clearly, the HR strategy would have to be a low-cost HR strategy. Okay. Sourcing, you want to source from the cheapest possible suppliers. So there is consistency between your how you configure the OM system and your competitive priorities, because that's what operation strategy is all about. Okay, so I think this is we have sort of discussed quite a number of things, and although I did say it was the last thing, but here's the very, very last for sure, is that I want you to also give consideration to the idea that a product life cycle has implications for its operation strategy. And so if you are, for example, just entering into a market and you want to offer either a service or a product, and if there's already an existing market but you just want to compete, you need to understand where that product is in its life cycle. For example, if I want to go into the MP3 market, well, where are those products in their life cycle? And what you find is that at different stages, your operation strategy needs to be slightly different. So in the early stages, where you're just introducing the product, the design is not settled yet, so you emphasize a lot on product design. You're still looking at your demand for your product, so you have to be very reactive and responsive in terms of your capacity. You don't want to build too much capacity and have that fixed. You want to have much more flexible capacity and so on. So you do short production runs, you will incur high production costs, you limit the number of models. Design is crucial at this point. Now you're experiencing some growth, you've seen a sort of a steady trend. You can now improve your forecasting, you could do capacity planning a whole lot better, and then you could become a bit more focused, enhance your distribution network, etc. So now you're seeing a growth stage. When you get to maturity and things are fairly stable and not moving that much, then you want to consider standardization, reducing your costs and so on, because there's just so little margin, because you have a number of competitors in the market and the product is actually now mature. And then when it's on the decline, then you definitely need to try to find ways to reduce your costs, standardize the product for sure, get rid of your excess capacity, and then of course streamline only to the products that are still selling reasonably, even though it's in decline. Okay, so we'll stop with that. And so just to sum things up, operation strategy is actually quite an interesting area, and it's quite important. It allows for some creative thinking, some soul searching, and for you to figure out how best to use the operations resources to support the company's competitive strategy. And so you could either help that company win or lose or achieve its mission and its vision by how well operations are actually configured. And usually, for the most part, companies that don't succeed, it's not because marketing has failed or finance has failed. Well, sometimes yes. Cash flow was not properly managed. Receivables were not properly managed. The marketing strategy was not as effective to create demand, but ultimately the brunt of the responsibility will fall in operations, particularly when it comes to cost and quality, speed, flex, all of those things that customers actually quite value. It is operations that play a major role in accomplishing those. Okay, so we will end on that note, and that was operations strategy.